Okay. Good morning and welcome to the SACOG Transportation Committee for Thursday, October 3rd, 2024 at 10 a.m. Any housekeeping notes or anything?
I just wanted to remind everyone that if you'd like to speak in your microphone, just push the button when it's lit green. You're speaking and it's going over our Zoom system. You don't need to hold it down while you speak, not on these mics. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Next, we're going to move on to the Pledge of Allegiance, and we're going to let Vice Chair Gog do that this morning.
Salute. Pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Vice Chair Gog.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And next up, we are going to move on to roll call, please.
Thank you. Good morning. Director Branscombe,
Yes, ma'am.
Chapman,
Here.
Early for Guerrero, absent. Howdeshelt,
Here.
Jennings, absent. Joyner, absent. Sander, absent, but Councilmember Budge is joining us this morning, but not as a voting member. Vice Chair Gog,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lauren, absent. Chair Bradford,
Here.
and ex officio member Tucker for Aceves.
Here.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And so are we at a quorum now? Excellent.
We do have a quorum, yes.
Perfect,
And we'll
wonderful.
note for the record that Director Early's here. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Welcome, Director Early. So we're going to go ahead and move on to public communication. Is there any public communication for any item not on the agenda this morning?
There's no public communications.
Okay, great, thank you. So with that, we are going to move on to consent. There's one item under consent. Approve the minutes of the September 5th, 2024 meeting. Is there any public comment on this item? I know I don't have any cards or any committee member wish to discuss this item. Okay,
There's no public comment.
great. Seeing none, is there a motion?
Through the chair, if there's questions, I'll move to approve the consent. Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, great. Next, we will move on to our two action items, starting with action item number 2, Regional Funding Program Guidelines. Morning.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee, Chris Doherty with the transportation team. The item before you this morning is the final guidelines for the regional funding program. So what is in front of you today is a culmination of an 18-month effort that was led by staff and 2 working groups, a board working group, which was 1 member from each county of the board, and a staff working group, which was 40 plus members of all of your staff that worked with us over 18 months to create these new regional guidelines. This process flow kind of indicates how we, the path that we got to the framework and to the guidelines that are in front of you. The stars here really indicate all the points where this process had come back to the committee and to the board to memorialize a decision. In February 2004, we came to you with a general high-level concept to align our funding programs by their fund type. And that was memorialized in February. From that point, we worked with the working groups to develop the programs that are nested under the regional funding program. And that was brought to you in June at the committee level, and then came back to the board in August for approval. And then since June, we've been working on the evaluation criteria that get folded into those final guidelines with the 2 working groups. And that is what is in front of you today, is that final work product for the programs that are moving forward. So to kind of go back over, this is a graphic we've used in the August meeting to approve the regional funding program. We're proposing here are approximately 4 programs, 3 nested under the federal programs that we run as a 6-county program, and then a state STIP 4-county inter-county program. Under the CMAQ funding, CMAQ, which is Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Funding, is funding the Next Generation Solutions and Clean Air Program. That program really looks to create those new mobility solutions for the region, funding, traditionally this funds projects like transit projects, active transportation projects, zero emission vehicle implementation, complete streets, things of that nature that can demonstrate a clean air and an air quality benefit. Under the SDPG funding, there's two programs. That is the System Performance Program. These are projects under this program that really aim to improve the performance of our existing transportation network. There's a wide eligibility for this program, so there's a lot of options there, but really to increase the how we use our existing transportation network. And then the System Preservation Program. And this is really designed to get to help our jurisdictions really get to that backlog of road rehabilitation projects that we've identified this process, one of the big needs of our local jurisdictions. And then for the state program, there is the STIP 4-county program. This is an intra-county program, meaning each county will will be competing against other jurisdictions within their own county only. Those will be, and the funding estimates for that are dictated by the state STIP funding estimate. And that program will kind of focus on Fix It First projects, increasing modal choice projects, and climate inequity. It aligns with state policies and around CAPTI and other climate and equity goals. And also not shown here are the priority programs. These are a list of these are the smaller policy-oriented goals. We fund programs like the Engage, Empower, and Implement program, our Sustainable Mobility program, CCAT program, which we work with the Air District on, and also with Spare the Air, and new programs like the Freeway Service Patrol and the Regional Pavement Management programs. So since we met in August, we have added two additional elements to the funding guidelines when we created them. One is to include farm-to-market routes as part of the System Preservation Program. We got some comments from the staff working group as a request to include that, so we have. And then also an application limit of 3 applications per agency per funding program. So that we can really focus on what the agency's top priorities are and move those forward. For next steps, we are looking at running the state 4-county STIP program in spring of 2025. That means we'll be returning to the committee and the boards with a funding estimate, probably in February or March, so we can release that call for projects. Included in that is also in that funding estimate will be those guidelines give SACOG the ability to pool some of those funds to move forward big regional serving projects. That decision will be made at the funding estimate at that time in early 2025. And then the federal programs, the plan is not to have those be implemented until after we have adopted the blueprint. So we'll be coming back with at the earliest. And we're coming back with a federal funding estimate later in 2025 as that calendar emerges more. So with that, the recommendation to the committee is to recommend to the board to approve the original funding program draft guidelines. I'm available for any questions you have.
Questions from committee members or comments? Director Ehrlich.
Hi, thank you so much for that presentation. And I just want to make sure I'm appropriately following. It would be helpful, at least just for me to know, I understand what we're adding and what it would be. How does that compare to what it was? So it would be helpful just like high level, we've changed this or something along those lines, or if nothing's changed.
Can I clarify the question? Is this from the last funding rounds, what we
Mhm,
changed?
yeah.
So, yeah, the last funding rounds were very different. This all emerged from the corrective action and what the board approved as our actions to address the corrective action that happened in February of 2023, where we were told that we have to run our federal programs as a 6-county program. Prior to that, we took all of our 3 sources of funds for 4 counties and pooled them together and then ran a competitive programs, awarded projects, but then applied the color of money of those 3 programs on the back end as we programmed those projects. This really changes this is really kind of a blank canvas approach to change our funding round. That corrective action kind of gave us that opportunity to really do something different that we had had. So this creates from our standpoint, a really more transparent and consistent programs that directly align to their fund source, so that we'll have clearer funding estimates from those fund sources moving forward. Is that?
It's very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was waiting for a response to what were the numbers before and what are they now?
The numbers, the funding estimates?
You're asking?
I was asking for the differences, but I don't mind you amending my question to.
I mean, how many programs did we have before
Yeah, I
or?
mean, was there a change in where funds are going? I mean,
This is a cleaner way of doing it, less of a change of where the funds are going. It's the same fund sources. There's not new fund sources. There's not any differences in the change, in the amounts of the fund sources. They're just being funneled directly into specific programs.
the same programs?
The same, we've created new programs, but they better align with the funding sources that fund it, if that makes sense. So let me scroll back to this graphic. So for our federal programs, we have 2 general sources of funding. Our CMAQ funding, which is congestion mitigation and air quality funding. That comes from the federal government directly to us through Caltrans. And then the SDBG funds, which same way, they come to us and have different eligibility.
Well, perhaps I'm displaying my ignorance, but had there been a list of targets and allocations previously for these funds?
So
Yeah.
let me try. So different, as Chris is explaining, right, different fund sources do come into our region, right? The SACOG programs. In the past, as Chris was explaining, that then showed up as a maintenance and modernization program. It showed up as programs that we were intending for all of your public works people and our SAC-RT to understand, right? Through the corrective action, so the money is coming. So if your question about actually overall funding,
Where it's going is what I'm trying to get at.
well, it's going to the proposed programs, right? And we can walk through those. Chris
So
will-
we're still a step away from actual defined targets.
Yes.
That's what-
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So on his last slide with the next steps, we talked about the funding estimate coming. That is part of the funding estimate. It's part of the considerations. We don't know the total amount of dollars that we have right now, which is going to be really important for when we actually run the program too. We need to make sure we have enough money.
And I understand this. So this is a step along the way, along the path.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
We
And
just-
what you're defining here is the guidelines, not suggested, but
Yes.
demanded by the federal and state sources. Okay.
Yes.
Well, and I would also say shaped by
Great
you all in the
conversation.
funding round working
Yeah.
group. Because remember, that's what you've been doing and working on the last 2 years.
Within that structure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
The evaluation criteria in the guidelines comes directly out of our MTPSCSs and policy goals, but also aligns and balances federal standards, state standards, and our own policy goals.
Thank you.
So,
It was helpful. Thank
So
you.
if I understand, maybe just to explain it slightly differently and check is, we're defining the buckets based
Yes.
on federal and state requirements for how that funding has to be used. Then once we learn how much funding we're actually going to get, then we can decide how that funding needs to be put in those different buckets. Is that correct? Okay.
And then if I just might add to hopefully some clarity.
Director Havisham, your mic.
Is my mic not on?
There you go.
Ah,
Hello. Hello. I'm soft-spoken this morning and that's unusual for me.
It is unusual.
Um, prior to the federal corrective action, El Dorado and Placer County would have their own pocket or bucket of money. And so what this does is now the federal corrective action says, okay, we're gonna have this be a 6-county program, and this be a 4-county program.
Okay, great. Not seeing any additional committee member comments at this time. I know we have one, at least one card from a public member who'd like to speak on this item. So, Mr. Deloria?
Morning, directors.
Morning.
Now it is. Good morning, directors. Woodrow Deloria, the Executive Director of the El Dorado County Transportation Commission. I just want to applaud Chris and your team for all the work with the funding. Check. There we go. You really got to eat this thing. So we just want to applaud Chris and the SACOG team for all the great work they did with the staff funding round working group, which I had the pleasure of chairing. We certainly, I think, reached a very strong consensus on the maintenance and preservation aspects of the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program funds. Historically, El Dorado and Placer counties have used those funds for a lot of maintenance projects, and we hope to continue to do that, as did all the other partner agencies on the working group. So just thank you for your great work on this, Chris, and SACOG staff.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Deloria. Okay, and so no additional public comment, is that correct?
There's no additional public comment.
Okay. Is there a motion to recommend approval to the board?
Out of Shelt moves.
Second.
Okay, for a second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, motion passes. Excellent. Next, we're going to move on to action item number 2. Thank you, Chris. Regional project prioritization program. And you're back again, Chris.
Thank you. Again, Chris Doherty with the transportation team. My second item today is the Regional Project Prioritization Program. This, to back up a little bit to earlier this year, in February, we came to the committee and board with a strategy to help our regional projects be more competitive at the federal level by placing a SACOG endorsement on a series of prioritized projects to apply for federal funding programs. In March of this year, we approved that list to move forward. We identified 5 projects to be priorities. They, at that time, became the transportation platform for advocacy at the Cap to Cap trip. We did it in advance of that trip, and the feedback we heard was very positive on that. And we've had one success out of those original 5 projects. We've received a $25 million RAISE grant award for the Southeast Connector 2-lane safety project. So we've already demonstrated that it's working. So with that, we decided to expand that program this summer to include some additional types of projects. Again, the construction projects, these are those projects that are applying for their last bit of funding at a federal level or at a state level to fully implement that project. These are usually large projects, usually too big for our funding round. So one of the goals of this is to move some of those projects off to better compete for state and federal grants so that our funding round can be more supportive for our regional projects that don't do well at that level. So we looked at construction projects, those that are kind of ready to go, that have completed all their design, environmental, and are really pursuing that last bit of funding. We also wanted a way to prioritize projects that are earlier in their process, that are still in design and are looking for really specific technical assistance and support from a regional entity, so they can get maybe funding for the design, or can, we can help them in any way we can. Those are the project development projects. And then we also have an opportunity right now with the Senate Bill 1 funding programs that are call for projects is out right now. Those applications are due in November next month. So the goal here is to prioritize our goals as a region for those SB 1 programs. So for the engagement on this process, we worked very closely with the staff funding round working group from the regional funding round that we just talked about. Since we had all of the partners and the local agencies in a room to talk about moving their their priority projects forward. So we used the same methodology that we used in February and March. So we released a call for projects in July. These applications are very light. I will add they're about a 2-page narrative on how they address our goals, a 2-page PDF, fillable PDF that kind of just explains the project and what their goals are, and then also just the funding plan that goes along with that. So we had for about a 4-week process to have those applications due. We received 29 applications total from 4 counties in the region. We did not receive any from Yuba and Sutter at the time. We will be doing some additional outreach for the next cycle of this so that we do get some of those other projects. But some of those projects ended up opting out and not pursuing. So we did a project review and evaluation with an internal staff from SACOG and then scored those projects and came up with the list that is in front of you today. So those projects were evaluated through 3 primary criteria. There we go, sorry. Regional serving. Do they improve regional mobility? Do they address safety? Do they address our policy goals across the region? Do they reduce VMT and GHG project? Are they adding additional modal choice? And are there partnerships? Are multiple agencies coming together to move these projects forward? Or are they truly crossing jurisdictional boundaries? Competitiveness really came into play when it comes to the actual specific programs that they're applying to. How aligned are they with that program? How competitive do we think they were going to be? At the federal and state level, every funding program now has pretty stringent equity and climate goals. So how well do they address those? Got really factored into their competitiveness moving forward. And then the readiness. Is the project kind of ready to go? I will note readiness was not a factor in scoring the project development projects because those projects will not have cleared their environmental phase and may not have significant funding yet, but they're big regional projects and really need to move, are worthy of moving forward. It will be factored into readiness when they go after the construction funding. Sure.
Under readiness.
Under readiness, significant funding investment. Can you describe that a little bit?
So we wanted to make sure that they were either had some SACOG funding already approved on the project or had a significant amount of funding already established for that project. So good example here, and one that's on the list, is the Ice Street Bridge Replacement Program. They're applying for $75 million right now at the federal level. They have approximately $200+ million already aligned to that project. That they're really well leveraged for that project. So it's going to be really competitive for those programs.
And is that local money or is that other federal or state money?
Could be local or other state funding, discretionary funding awards. We want to make sure that that project is competitive for those and is really demonstrating either that local or already has achieved some grants.
Right. So for instance, in Placer County, we charge a fee, SPARTA fee, for interchanges on 65 from our development community. That would be, if that were on the list, it would be significant funding
Correct.
considered. Okay.
Yeah, we're looking for a little bit like just over, like not just the match, maybe a little bit over the match, maybe something with a little more investment and some priorities there.
Very helpful.
Sure. So with that, the evaluation process took place and the internal team from SACOG scored the projects. We have a list of recommended projects for you. For the construction projects, we are advising that 7 projects move forward as these priorities. We've identified 1 project for each funding program so that we are not working against each other in the region. Really, the other goal here is really to limit that interregional competitiveness against each other. We want to identify 1 program as our regional priority and move it forward. We're looking at the Winters County Road 32 bike trail. There's a new program, the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program at the federal level. Really competitive for that. Again, I mentioned the Ice Street Bridge Replacement Program. I do want to note that this list here that is in front of you right now does differ from the list that is in your packet. We had a recent communication with one of our members. The Marysville Boulevard Vision Zero plan, they had informed us that they plan to go after the Safe Streets for All funding next cycle, not this cycle. So what we did is we moved the Stockton Boulevard Complete Streets project at the county into that next cycle slot. They scored so close to each other. This was not a hard decision. These were really, it was very hard for the review groups to kind of go back and forth in these projects. So what we did is we moved the Marysville project down to the project development, which you'll see in the next list here. I will let you know, we do have an amended recommendation for you today on that so that we can approve this list and not the one that's in your packet moving forward. But I'll get to that the last slide. Again, the Trip to Green implementation, this is a City of Placerville and El Dorado Transportation Commission project. Camera Road extension in Elk Grove, SR 65 phase 1 that PCTPA is leading, and the US 50 Gold Line enhancements from the Sac County, which is a combination of an interchange and RT light rail improvements. For project development funds or priorities, we have, these are going to be pursuing funds probably in the 2026 range or maybe later on some regards. Here we're prioritizing the Sacramento Valley Station that's going to be pursuing MEGA in 2026. The Marysville Vision Zero program project that we spoke about just a second ago for Safe Streets for All. The Stockton Boulevard BRT corridor, that's just in its initial stages of planning and design. So we want to make sure we support that big regional project. The Truxell Bridge project, which is a new American River crossing, is going after Rays this year for planning. The county's farm to fork routes for preservation. They want to be doing that plan, going after a rural grant there. It's a great opportunity for us to pursue rural funding that this region has not identified a lot of. And then Yolo County, Road 32A, doing a separated crossing right there by the causeway in a major safety project. And then for our Senate Bill 1 projects, we have two programs that applied, one for each of our programs. The Placer Sacramento Gateway program, which is a collaboration of many partners in Placerville, Placer County and Sacramento, multiple projects on the I-80 corridor. They're going to be pursuing solutions for congested corridors funding. And then the Grant Line Road, this is the Southeast Connector JPA, along with Rancho Cordova, Sacramento and Folsom, pursuing a TSEP award. I will note that the TSEP award does require a specific nomination to proceed, which is included in our recommendation. So our next steps right now is once this list is approved, we will start working with those project teams on what individual support each of those projects need. Is it data support? Is it grant application support? What is that? This is a kind of a new concept to really focus our efforts on technical assistance here at SACOG on these projects. So we want to make sure that we're really developing that tailored approach for each of these projects moving forward. So as I said, we have an amended recommendation for you today in number 1 here that we approve the staff recommendation list, but that includes that inclusion of the Stockton Boulevard Complete Streets project as the priority for Safe Streets for All and moves that Vision Zero project down to project development. We nominate the Grant Line Road for the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. And then we also nominate the Placer Sacramento Gateway project, but also that SACOG will be a co-applicant on that. We need your approval for that as well. So with that, I'm happy to pause and answer any questions you might have.
Questions from committee members?
Are we going to discuss option 1 and option 2?
That's coming up on item 4. Yeah. I do have a question. I did have an opportunity to talk with county staff since I know Yuba didn't submit anything. And it was a little bit of oversight. And so it's really just a process question. It was oversight on our part, a little bit of process question moving forward. The next update to this would be like a year from now. Okay.
Probably thinking early summer of next year, so that we'll be getting ready. And the idea here is we're doing this annually so that we're getting ready for that next calendar year of funding cycles so that it's people are planning ahead and really thinking strategically about what those regional investments and regional.
Right, so,
priorities are.
obviously I understand that if something wasn't submitted, by the deadline it's scored, it's done.
Sure.
Would never remove anything from the list or put something else on the list. If there's a category that maybe exists that doesn't have something, is there an opportunity for potential amendment to add something for where there isn't something in that category, or wait till next year?
We could definitely take a look at that, but I think we did a kind of a call for projects and process, so
Right.
At the worst, it would be waiting till next year.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any additional questions?
Yeah, I just have a clarifying, do you want to call me?
Go ahead.
My bad. I have a clarifying question. So as we are approving these amended recommendations, I just want to make sure I understand, would this then be, as you go into cap to cap next year, you would be advocating for these projects?
Yes.
So I do want to compliment you guys on that. I feel that cap to cap is an opportunity to really leverage the power that is 400 community members, elected leaders, all the things coming to DC. And the idea that we have a little bit more structure and what we're advocating for, actual outcomes that we are then looking for success, I think makes us and puts us in a better position to actually hit a target, because we have a real target that we are aiming for. So I just want to compliment you guys and thank you for doing that, because I do think that is an underutilized arm of this region.
Director Early, I would just say, if you remember, you all went through this the first time in March in your Woodland Board meeting. This is great practice, right? We have been wanting to do this for quite some time. And we've always thought, like, how are we going to actually put forward a short list of regional priorities? But when we went back to cap, and I was in those transportation meetings, we had members of Congress saying, it'd be really helpful to know your priorities. And we were able to say, look on page 1. There they are, right? And that was like, oh, you've done your homework. And now I was back in DC on Monday, Senator Padilla's office and others, eager to actually hear the result of this and wanting other regions in California to follow suit. And on the flip side, I would just say, and I'm sorry, Director Bradford, in terms of your county having projects, but the problem a little bit that we're trying to solve some multiple problems, but in the last few years, sometimes projects will go in for a competitive grant federally, and we don't even know about them. And then we get a call saying, what do you think about this project? And it's hard when we don't actually even know that the project's applied. So hopefully what we're trying to do, right, is bring some discipline to this and transparency, and then really put our advocacy muscle behind it. So
It's great work.
If I may, I want to compliment management, because it was earlier this year. And I think, James, you had mentioned Cleveland as an example.
yeah, exactly.
Where they had been very successful in getting projects approved, because they didn't go in with a laundry list of 20.
Yep.
They focused it, and that creates tension within an organization, because everybody wants to be on the list.
Yeah.
But if you add to the list, it undermines the chances of everybody. So we're more focused as well as disciplined.
Well, credit to your staff here. So
Those did well.
if Cleveland can do it, right? I think no disrespect to Cleveland.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to probe on your question a little bit more. I know that the mission at Beale Air Force Base is critical. And I know that a number of the employees there are Placer County, Roseville residents and things like that. So was your question more if money became available, how do we?
So my
pivot it?
question, it actually was unrelated to, for the most part, unrelated to access to Beale. It was a different project that I don't believe under construction funding, there's anything listed here in that category. I wouldn't be for sure about that. And I know there's already local source of funding. We've already applied for some federal funding. And so it was kind of like, hey, is it too late to, if it doesn't conflict with anything else on here and it's unique, kind of throw it into the mix. So that was really kind of my question, but I appreciate you asking about Beale and Placer. But
But your question was unrelated to.
unrelated to,
Thank you.
to that. So, and I'll just add, I think this is great, being on the mega region working group, and going at the state level to advocate for projects across the Bay Area, our region, and San Joaquin County. The feedback we receive from state legislators and, state agency, executive agency folks in transportation, when we show up with a list of, we have a mega region dozen, and it's 4 projects from each region, out of the 3 regions. And when we show up with that list and we say, hey, all, 22 counties, and I got my numbers wrong, but large amount of counties, millions of people, we're all behind these 12 projects.
Nearly half the counties in the state.
It makes a huge difference, when we come in with that message. And so this is great. So I appreciate it. Okay, anything else on this from the committee? Okay, I do not think we have any public comment, Lynette, is that correct?
There's no public comment.
Okay, so with that, is there a motion to recommend the amended recommendation to the board?
Early moves.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a first and a second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great, motion passes. Thank you, Chris. Next, we're going to move on to our information items, starting with item 4, 2025 Blueprint, Revised Draft Transportation Project List, Operations and Performance. Morning, Zach.
PowerPoint to get up here. 1 second, please. All right. Good morning. My name is Zach Miller. I'm the program manager for the 2025 Blueprint. And today I'm really going to be sharing with you all an update in real time of where we are in development of the transportation project list, how we're faring relative to achieving the greenhouse gas emissions target for the region. And I really hope to get your feedback for staff on the transportation project list as we enter the home stretch of making the final revisions to the plan. So just a quick agenda. So I'll be starting with a summary of the input that staff would like to get out of this meeting here today. I'll then provide a brief summary of the process to date. Then I'll be getting into the transportation investment options and how they perform relative to the greenhouse gas target. And finally, I'll provide some additional greenhouse gas reduction strategies at our disposal that we could use to potentially achieve the target. So jumping into the ask, today I'm going to be presenting 2 different options that were developed by staff for you all to consider. So I want to preface this with that I'm not asking you to choose between the 2 options 1 or 2. These 2 options really simply serve as data points and discussion topics to help the board and the staff balance the requirements of the plan from a policy perspective, as well as from the local input and feedback that we've been receiving to date. So we're looking to get feedback from you all on those 2 options being presented here today, obviously. And then I'll also be describing the 2 options and how they fundamentally differ and where each would land in terms of achieving the greenhouse gas target. So during this portion of the presentation, I'd like you to consider which of the additional GHG reduction strategies that I'll be presenting would you support, including in the plan to help meet the region's greenhouse gas emissions target. So just to start off, I want to go over the transportation project sponsor feedback that has occurred to date. So this slide really shows you how we've engaged with transportation project sponsors throughout the development of this list, which is going to continue through this month, October as well. So the initial call for transportation projects that were considered for inclusion in this plan, the 2025 Blueprint, happened all the way back in 2022. So using the information from this initial sponsor nomination process, staff really began development of the transportation project list. So the first iteration of the transportation project list was developed for the discussion scenario, which was presented earlier this year back in, I believe it was April. So as you may recall, this was referred to as the, the skinny version of the list because it was a relatively bare bones transportation network of the minimum transportation improvements needed to serve the assumed land uses while addressing the triple bottom line framework that we have adopted. So we distributed the discussion scenario transportation project list to all sponsors as well as the board earlier this year. And then we began what you see on the screen here is phase 1 of the more focused transportation project sponsor engagement effort. So this phase of the sponsor engagement was really focused on input and comments on that very first iteration of the list. We took all that input from the transportation project sponsors and as well as the board and used it to inform the next iteration of the project list, while also trying to balance the triple bottom line. So the next step in the engagement process is and was phase 2, which is ongoing. So over the past month and continuing into and through this month, we have met with sponsors to gather feedback, updates to the project list, and priorities on the project list that individual sponsors may have. So we've held 30 some odd meetings with a large number of local agencies and transportation project sponsors throughout the region, and we continue to meet with them this week as well as into next week and into October to gather their input and feedback on the list. So just to give you an idea of how the engagement with sponsors has informed the development. Yes.
I apologize for interrupting. What are the examples of the sponsors? Who are the sponsors of these programs?
Yeah, so sponsors could be local agencies, it could be cities, it could be counties, it could be, transit providers. It's essentially all who have projects that they would like to
Usual
carry
suspects.
forward. Yeah, yeah,
Thank you.
exactly. All right, so to give you all an idea on how the engagement with sponsors has informed the development of the transportation project list, I've included this table here showing kind of the progression from March to September and then to today. As you can see, the sponsor feedback and input on priorities and specific projects that should be included in the plan has resulted in the addition of the inclusion of additional road and highway capacity projects, additional maintenance and rehabilitation dollars being included in the plan, as well as additional transit capital projects in the draft transportation project list. And then as a reminder of what we're working towards and where we're going with this, as you can see in the slide here in front of you, the next and final step in this process of developing the transportation project list is that we plan to bring the final scenario for adoption in November to the board. Therefore, the input and direction staff receives here today will be essential in how we make those final revisions to the transportation project list before we bring it to the board in November.
Can you go back to the prior slide? Before that. Now, I see the percentage increase. The transit capital is more than 100% plus of what it was, what it started out to be. Whereas the percentage, the delta on the others are modest. What's driving that?
What's driving that is that we've been in constant coordination with SAC-RT. There was an initial nominations process.
They've probably been in constant contact with you.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones with the handout, right?
So we've been in constant coordination with them, and they've set forth a set of transit capital projects that we're currently assessing and talking with them about. It probably would have been best to show that as pending, but because we have this transportation project list out currently with the ins and outs, as you have well seen, we wanted to reflect that number here today. And so that coordination is ongoing, and it's based on.
Besides the lobbying, what are the policies or policies driving this huge delta?
I think the policies driving it is that a lot of the SAC-RT projects, as well as other transit provider projects, serve the priorities of the 2025 blueprint and the triple
GHG
bottom
and
line.
BMT?
GHG
Primarily.
reduction, VMT reduction.
Now, is that
as well as access
theoretical
and
or
equity.
is it actually proven to have the impact? In other words, are we getting the bang for the buck on those targets?
We'll actually get into that later on in the presentation when we talk about additional GHG reduction strategies. But yes, transit does get a additional reduction, obviously,
Is
for
that just on paper or is that measured?
that's measured and it's based in, studies that have been conducted.
And the studies are what metrics do the studies look at?
The studies look at, I think, real world data.
Passenger volume, I mean,
So look, we should have a discussion, right, as we have many times in this committee about transit's role in the region and regional goals. I would say it has an important role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It isn't like, as you've heard us say many times, land use and housing and economic development actually plays a really big role. There's many other reasons to have a very good, robust transit network. We're never going to get European standards of transit ridership here, right? Like that, we've been very clear about that, but actually maintaining an option for people to be able to use transit from an economic development perspective is important. If the committee wants to dive into sort of the metrics around this, we'd be happy to come back. But so it's an important role it plays.
when you see that big a difference,
Well,
It's
I
just
think
the-
maybe we should come
what
back
metrics really support that?
Yeah,
And
sidebar here.
are we getting the bang for the buck?
Yeah,
Or is it
I'm-
theoretical and hoped for?
And-
So I would like to come back and give you all some more information. This could also be just, we've been working with SAC-RT when you're doing your capital budgeting far out, 25 years. It's very different on the transit side than the highway side. I don't think we're going from 3 to 6 billion here because we think there'll be a big GHG. I would imagine we're just working with the project sponsor, in this case SAC-RT, and probably YOLO, YTD, and maybe even Yuba Sutter Transit on what are your, or truly your, that's what I'm guessing. So
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I sit on the RT board. And I can tell you, and I hope everyone's noticed, that on the green line and the gold line, we are starting to convert to the new low floor cars that Siemens is building here in Sacramento. We just started it at the beginning of September. And one of the main, and RT is also getting grants to help fund the purchase of the low floor cars. But one of the main reasons is the fact that the RT cars, there were fewer and fewer and fewer of them in service because they're the original ones from the 80s. And climbing into that car is a huge step from the ground. So at this point, it's got life cycle issues, and it's got accessibility. With these, all the person has to do is push a button and a ramp connects with the ramp. So it's a huge improvement, and every one of the cars that dates from the 80s has got to be replaced.
Director Habershell, before we get back to Zach and continue on, did you have anything that you want?
Director Butch just nailed what I was
Okay.
gonna ask.
Perfect.
Probably a lot of,
So it sounds like some future discussion about
focusing.
is warranted, but if we can, I know we do have a time limit. Too.
Follow up later. would be great.
All right, so jumping into option one here, I want to start by providing an overview and a refresher on how we developed option one. So the very first step of the process was to take all the projects that were nominated, as I mentioned earlier, back in 2022 and refine that list. So we began by screening the full list of nominated transportation projects to determine the projects that would best serve the land use pattern that was adopted by this board in June. So that screening process was rooted in the triple bottom line policy goals and yielded the first iteration of the transportation project list I mentioned earlier, that scaled back and kind of skinny transportation network. As a reminder, we received roughly double the amount in proposed roadway and highway capacity projects as reasonably foreseeable funding for this major project category would cover. So we received about, I think, 14 billion in road and highway capacity project nominations. And we anticipate, having 7 or 8 billion in available funding during the lifespan of our plan out to 2050. We then distributed that list and gathered feedback from local jurisdictions and transportation project sponsors throughout the region. So this feedback was used to identify local priorities as well as feedback that was then used to refine the transportation project list. So the list that you see in front of you today is the third iteration of that list, which includes 2 cycles of transportation sponsor input and feedback. And it's important to note that local priorities and feedback were collected and considered in the context of those musts that you see up here on the screen of fiscal constraint, as well as achieving the greenhouse gas target for this option 1. So that's all to say that not all requests by project sponsors were added into the list for option 1. So option 1 really reflects staff's best efforts to prioritize and balance the policy objectives of the plan, including the triple bottom line framework, the greenhouse gas reduction target, and local priorities, all within the funding constraints of the reasonably available funding for transportation projects over the timeframe of the plan out to 2050. So option 1, just a few numbers, would include the allocation of funding across major project categories, including roughly 14 billion in maintenance and rehabilitation funding, road and highway capacity projects totaling approximately 8 billion and approximately 2.3 billion in bike and ped projects. So option 2, this option takes the same general approach as option 1 with one primary difference, and that being that it puts added emphasis on local priorities and input from project sponsors, requesting that specific projects be included in the plan and in this transportation project list. So fundamentally, it's more permissive of bringing in additional capacity where local resources could largely fund those projects, and the project is intended to meet some other objective. For example, local level of service standards, or being consistent with conditions of approval and development triggers that plan for expansion ahead of a next major phase of development. So it's important to note that the majority of projects added to option 2 are predominantly paid through for development activity and local fees. I also want to reiterate something that I mentioned last meeting, that if these projects were not added to the plan and development occurs differently than we project, land use development occurs differently than we project in our plan, these projects could potentially be amended into the plan through the plan amendment process at a later date. So staff developed this scenario using input and feedback received to date during phase 2 of the engagement process that I went over earlier. That's been occurring since late August of this year. So how this option really differs from option 1 is that it includes, roughly 45 road and highway capacity projects that were identified as high priorities by sponsors. It includes approximately 125 or so additional lane miles on the roadway network throughout the entire region, and it adds approximately over $700 million to the overall road and highway capacity budget. So that's at a high level how those 2 options kind of differ. So thinking back to the last slide in option 2, staff has some concern that the inclusion of these 45 plus projects could collectively add road or highway capacity that will result in an increased VMT and GHG emissions, thus making it harder for the region as a whole to achieve our greenhouse gas target. So a few important reminders before I get into how these 2 options perform from a GHG perspective. We're not asking you to choose one option or another here today. We're giving you the information and data points to help you make an informed decision related to the implications of bringing in additional capacity increasing projects into the plan and the relative trade-offs between the 2 options being presented here today. So of the 45 or so projects that were included in option 2, no one project is going to make or break the region's ability to hit the greenhouse gas target. I want to emphasize that this comparison is really meant to show that we need to continue the collaboration and coordination between SACOG and local agencies and transportation project sponsors on specific projects and priorities to refine the list such that we're able to meet our greenhouse gas target and reflect those priorities and projects of our region's transportation project sponsors. So ultimately, we hope to get feedback here today on how we can continue to refine this transportation project list before we ask you to take action in November. So with that in mind, we want to provide you all with our best estimates at this point in the process of how the two options would compare as it relates to the greenhouse gas emissions and meeting our state mandated target.
Question. How are those numbers calculated? What are the data inputs to reach those percentages?
I'll go through that right now.
Thank you. Was this in the material, in the printed material?
In the staff report,
Yeah,
this table, no, it was not.
this would have been very interesting to have there.
So that first row, the land use and transportation, that is essentially that nexus of the transportation network that has been modeled at this point, combined with the land use assumptions that were adopted by the board back in June. And so those are all we talked about this at length when we were adopting the land use assumptions. So essentially putting uses closer to one another, more mixed use development in order to make a more efficient transportation pattern. That second row, the GHG reduction strategies from the 2020 MTPS-CS, you can see that we're assuming that we would carry forward the GHG reduction strategies that were previously adopted and included in the 2020 MTPS-CS. So these strategies would include those that you see on the slide here in front of you and include a variety of strategies that we as staff see as feasible and necessary to remain within striking distance of the GHG target for either option. So it's important to note that the 2020 MTPS-CS was adopted by our board and approved by the California Air Resources Board. So these are GHG strategies that we as staff have a high level of confidence in for helping us achieve our greenhouse gas target.
There must be an equation that equals 14.1%.
So
and is that equation are the inputs and the construction of that equation, is that something that's been imposed by Air Resources Board? Is it something we do? Does every other regional group do the same, use the same approach?
Yeah, so that number, the 14.1.
It would be interesting to see the equation and the inputs.
So that number 14.1 that you see up there in front of you was modeled using our SAC-SIM model, which models the interaction between land use and transportation on a regional basis specific to our region. It's a very complex model. It has, a ton of different inputs, but I think for the purposes of this presentation, the primary inputs are land uses, those land uses that were adopted by the board back in June, and then the transportation network that I mentioned that was essentially married up with
Can the equation be committed to paper?
We have a very extensive model.
Just had a 2-day conference
Yeah.
last week, actually.
So,
on
because if
travel
this is
models.
some black box, then no one knows what varying
So
factors affect the answer.
I assume there's an opportunity for any interested board or committee members to sit down with staff and go over in
Absolutely,
whatever level of
absolutely.
detail
We would be
that
happy.
member
we would be
wishes
happy
to
to
do.
open that all up. It's not a black box, but it is a pretty sophisticated, model, right? And it's one that we've worked on forever. We've upgraded. It's actually the same model that many of your agencies use, consultants use, our developers use. And the reason we have a conference on it is because people come here to actually learn how we do it. So it also is, by the way, just as we've talked about in the past, it is informed now, which is really cool, by what we call replica data, which is observed actual GPS, cell phone. I'm looking down here to Clint as well, just to make sure but it's informed by actual real world observations, right? So yeah, so that's if we want to we got a lunch, absolutely, and just walk through the travel model and tell you how it
just
works.
seems
Sure.
Just from a researcher perspective. I'm
Sure.
like, this sounds good.
Okay. So it sounds like something to schedule then.
Yeah, since we're making the final decision based on that, be
Well,
interesting to know.
you've made the decision you made in June is the 14.1. So you've adopted
Yeah,
that.
I get that.
And yeah, look, the last thing I'd say, yes, we've heard black box being thrown around, right, with the travel model. Sure, we don't predict the future because we'd be living in Vegas if we did. We forecast it. And what I think is really helpful, and then again, if we can do this lunch or whatever you want to do, or maybe after the board meeting, is when we looked at the replica data, the cell phone and the actual, it was pretty close to what we had been modeling. So, we were all really worried, right? Like, my gosh, what if we're using this model? And again, nobody's predicting, we're forecasting, but it was pretty close to what we have been looking at. When we do our Green Means Go program, we're modeling VMT and we're trying to get more development happening right in those low VMT areas. So, but absolutely, this is always the question. We had it earlier this year when we talked about the land use framework. How do we know? But anyway, happy to do that. We'll think about when we could offer some kind of a session for you all on the travel model.
Thank you. Okay. Please continue, Zach.
All right. So as you can see in the third row of the table, you'll see an estimate of the increase in greenhouse gas emissions that will result from the inclusion of these 45 or so on projects collectively. So to note here, this is a sketch level analysis, and thus it's simply our best estimate at this time of the effect that these projects would potentially have in terms of greenhouse gas emissions.
So I'm sorry, you use that term sketch level estimate in the staff report. Is that your definition? It's your.
So the sketch level estimate, that is a off model calculation. In the time frame we had before this specific committee meeting, we didn't have the opportunity to run the option 2 through the full model. We only had the opportunity to run model 1 or option 1. So to get option 2, that 1% you see there, that was done using the NCST. It was a off-model calculation, a spreadsheet-based calculation using the NCST calculator. It was a resource developed by University of California, Davis, to kind of calculate induced demand. And then it's also used, I know, by Caltrans on their projects. And it's also what is recommended by the California Air Resources Board to be used to calculate this kind of induced demand and induced VMT associated with projects. So it's based on, input that we've had from California Air Resources Board on how to analyze this sort of thing. But our model, once we run it through the model and when we bring the final option in November, we will be able to provide more fine-tuned estimate of what our model actually says. But through previous efforts and previous testing, this is going to be, it's going to be fairly close to what our model, the reduction that you would see in the greenhouse gas in our model as well.
So so you said you'll run it through the model for the November meeting. Is that what I heard you say?
Mhm.
Okay.
I have a follow-up question just to that. How, understanding that it sounds like it was quicker to run the NCST model, could you and did you run option 1 through that just to see how close they actually perform to each other?
So it was included, it's baked into the model run. So that induced demand is baked into the model run, the 14.1, that kind of land use interaction with the transportation network. But we did not there was no way to run it through the NCST calculator because that would be additional, it would be on top of what the model is already saying. So kind of backing out that number.
I wasn't actually suggesting you back it out. So in the same way that for option 2, I understand you're saying like, hey, there's this really complicated model, didn't have time to run it twice. Just bear with me just for a second. And so you didn't do that for option 2. You did what is a sketch, a close draft, right? Like ballpark, right? I totally understand that. And I think you're doing the ballpark because it's quicker to do the ballpark, I think, right?
Mhm.
The only thing you're actually hearing me say is, did you do the ballpark for option one in addition to the full model to have a better understanding of how close is the ballpark actually get you to the full model?
So I think the option one analysis will have paired up the actual transportation investments with the land use to a point where there wouldn't be that induced demand. So I think what we're saying here is that the potential for these additional projects to be added, the capacity increasing projects to be added, it could potentially result in some induced, say, land use in a certain area. So if you add additional capacity in one.
I think we're not on the same page.
Yeah. May I try?
I would love that.
Okay. Okay, so in option one, we have very tightly paired the transportation investments to the land use pattern.
Mhm.
And so when we do that, there's no induced demand. It's not going to spur more development because we're saying transportation is serving exactly this.
Okay.
Under option two, we have included additional transportation projects that are not paired to that land use pattern. And so what we would typically do is say, okay, we need to estimate then what kind of land use development would happen because of that. And then we would run it through the whole travel model. Since we don't have time to do that, obviously, we applied that NCST calculator to be able to capture what additional, when we say additional demand, we're saying, you know, typically you'd have a project go in and then a whole bunch of development would go there because the project is serving development, right? So that's what we're trying to capture. And we did not have time to be able to fully analyze that.
So we wouldn't have run the NCST calculator on option
Right,
one,
because
Would
it's,
need change from option
Yep.
one for that to tell you anything.
yes,
And so unless we removed projects from option one and then ran
completely
it,
understand.
hard to
Got
tell.
it. Okay, you tried. And thank you.
I did a much better job. Yeah.
If I could, and I'm like, this was a good explanation. So I just to be clear, right? And this is a good discussion because you're trying to, you know, look under the hood, right? As you should do. Essentially, I think it's our pretty strong professional opinion that option two will not meet the greenhouse gas target. There's no way you pull yourself back from that. And so you're in what we call an alternative planning strategy. We don't meet the target. And that's what you kind of gave us direction to do, right? Is to try to meet the target. You can, as the board, choose whatever transportation package you want in November. And you can choose something that's more in the lines of option two. We are just trying this morning to tell you, hey, fair warning, right? The direction you've given us to hit the greenhouse gas target, we might be able to do that. Picking option one, we have a pretty good chance of meeting the target. We're not there yet. Zach's going to tell you a little bit more about that. We understand that option one, and some of you are here this morning, right, to talk about what's not in option one. We understand you've got some high priority projects in some of our jurisdictions. Many of them, we've actually figured it out. We've been working with everybody very closely. So as close as we can get to option one is going to give you the best chance of reading the greenhouse gas target, just to be super clear. And if we don't do that, we're not eligible for state transportation funding.
So if I understand kind of from the perspective of the value in digging down into the weeds, whether it's 1.2%, 0.8%, 1% increased, we miss the target. And so if the estimate is off a little bit, we still miss the target. So I think that's the real policy discussion, right? Is do we want to adopt a scenario that misses the target, or do we want to adopt a scenario that has a better chance of meeting the target? And then we can certainly, our staff can continue to work with SACOG staff to get into the weeds of this might need to be in, this could be out, while still being able to meet that target. If that's what the committee says we want to do, is meet the target.
Question.
I was just going to say, I mean, in terms of how this has moved over the last 3 months, I think the slide. I'm the person that usually says that. Okay, my mic is now on. In terms of Zach showed the slide earlier, right? The sort of the discussion scenario kind of moving along. I mean, you brought up the transit question, but that is that table shows you our back and forth with jurisdictions, right? We're trying to make this fit. in a way that still gives you a chance to meet the greenhouse gas target. And if you want to go back to that table, you can, but it just sort of shows. So we're going to continue to working with all of your jurisdictions, try to figure out how we can develop a scenario that actually gives you a chance of meeting the greenhouse gas target.
I'm sure you're in touch with other COGs. What are you hearing from other COGs in terms of their potential for meeting greenhouse gas
I think we'll be
targets?
discussing
We will be
that in
digging
item
into that,
5.
The next item. Perfect setup. Yeah, this is hard. And I think as we talked about at the Placerville board
Yes.
meeting, if we can do this and reach the target, it'll probably be the last plan under the current framework that we are able to do that. So, because the next plan by 2035, if the target year stays the same, the closer you get, the harder it is. So, the next item, hold that question. We will come back to can we change the framework or update SB 375? So stay tuned.
Yeah, so the headline here for this slide that's still in front of you is that option 1 puts the region in a fairly good position in terms of being able to hit that greenhouse gas target with some additional strategies that I'll go into here in a bit. Well, option 2 will make it very, very difficult to achieve that target, if not impossible.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
and I'm happy to have a meal over this, right? But I want to check my memory. So when you do at some point in time, emissions efficiency gets calculated into this formula. 25 years out, I'm not having a conversation over the consumer adoption of electric vehicles. I'm asking about emissions, right? So emissions efficiency is calculated.
Yes, it is included in the
into
calculation. Yes,
When
it
we
is.
get to 1.4.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So regardless of where we end up with the transportation project list on that spectrum between option 1 and option 2, it's apparent that based on the GHG numbers you just saw, that we'll need to employ additional greenhouse gas reduction strategies on top of what was included in the 2020 MTPSCS if we're going to hit our state greenhouse gas target. So staff has identified the additional strategies that you see here in front of you today that we see as very promising in terms of closing that greenhouse gas gap. So those additional GHG strategies are provided on the screen here, and they include the school bus renewal program, additional telework policies, reduced transit fares, and increased mileage-based user fee. So the school bus and additional telework policies would provide much smaller reductions, less than 1%, likely in the low tenths of a percentage point. Well, the reduced transit fares and increasing the mileage-based user fee above that, which was included in the last plan, would likely get us a larger reduction percentage, somewhere between 0 and 1%, depending on how far we lean into those. So the upshot here is that it's likely that you'll need at least 3 of these additional strategies in some form or another to hit the greenhouse gas target for option 1. And even with the implementation of all 4 of these additional strategies, it's unlikely that we'll be able to meet the greenhouse gas target with option 2.
Chairman,
Yes.
my apologies for not having asked this question in advance, but as I'm going through this list, I'm seeing maybe redundancies in road segments. And if there are in there, I'm looking at Baseline Road, for instance. If there's redundancies in there, are we now duplicating vehicle miles traveled and thus, the emissions that get generated?
By redundancies, do you mean duplicate project listings or just, Baseline Road having multiple phases of improvement?
So I see a project in here, Baseline from Watt to Sutter County line. Then Baseline, City of Roseville to Paladay, same footprint. Baseline to Sutter County. So I want to make sure that there isn't a redundancy in vehicle miles traveled, thus generating additional greenhouse gas.
There is not. Those are just individual segments of a, overall improvement of Baseline Road over, a period of time.
Okay, I want to drill down just a second.
Mhm.
It's the same footprint. If you're adding 2 lanes, you still have capacity. And when you add 4 lanes, you still have largely the same capacity. So I'll take this offline. I don't want to slow us down, but
Thank you.
I just want to make sure the list is as clean as possible.
Yep.
So that 1.4 doesn't, is really 1.4.
Yeah, and that's a large part of, working with transportation project sponsors that we've been doing over the past 6 months or so, is making sure that list is fully refined and, updated. All right, so back to the ask, here today, I'd like to, dive into what feedback you have on the two options that were presented, and then any feedback you may have on which additional GHG reduction measures you would potentially support, including in the plan to meet the region's greenhouse gas reduction target. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation and all the work you've put into this. My question is more like in the staff report around option 1 and on the slide that you had that lays out the percentages of the funds that we're spending, the 7.7 billion road highway. How do those allocation percentages compare to other like COGS or metropolitan transit agencies here in California?
Yeah.
Like, is it common to have bike and ped so much, 2.3 compared to 7.7? Is that what we see across the board in planning agencies in California? Like, are we in like other agencies? How's that?
I wouldn't say it's across the board.
Sure.
Put us up against the big four. We're one of the big
Yeah.
four MPOs,
Yeah.
but if you take us out of the equation, it's still better than 80% of the population. We're about 6, the other big four, 80. But compared to them, they have more of their budget going into road maintenance, into transit, into active transportation than we do. One reason for that is they're much more mature regions. They don't have as much outward expansion as ability any longer. And so as a share of proportional budget, plus they're so much bigger, as a share of proportional budget, a lot more goes into maintaining and operating their existing systems than in our region. When you compare us more to like the Central Valley, so they're smaller than us, we're probably more in alignment with them, where you're seeing a fairly healthy share of expansion still. One of the challenging parts about reading the budget, especially on the active transportation side, is possibly even a majority of active transportation is built as part of larger other road projects, and we wouldn't capture that separately, right? So this is going to capture a lot of trail construction if you're doing sidewalk, but it's just a sidewalk. But if you're doing bike lanes or a trail as part of a larger road project, it's going to be captured in that. So there's going to be expansion to the bike ped system, active transportation system.
So other MPOs more so, and the larger ones are doing more info projects, right, as opposed to growth. Then they're
Yeah, you
maintaining
kind of
their
see
roads.
that over time
Got
as
it.
a region matures, a shift
Yeah.
towards operating,
Okay.
maintaining your existing system and away from expanding. We're kind of in the
In the
middle of that.
Okay, great question. Thank you.
Additional,
Okay, so
go ahead.
thank you all. I realize I'm not David's official alternate, so my job today is to advocate for 2 Rancho Cordova projects which got dropped out. I can't tell you what page they are on, but they are SAC 24468 and SAC 24220. One is the Sunrise, completion of Sunrise, and the other one is the Rancho Cordova Parkway and interchange. Speaking specifically to Sunrise Boulevard, Rancho Cordova and Sacramento County are very much in agreement that this project needs to go forward as soon as possible. We need to remember that Sunrise is designated Highway 2. And currently, not in the future, but currently, it supports 6 jurisdictions, the entire rural South County, also several of the rural communities, and probably all of Amador County at the same time. And this is what we have now. In the past, SACOG has led the charge when Rancho Cordova first incorporated. SACOG led the charge to get the Army Corps of Engineers to do something about their Waters of the U.S. program to allow us to just widen Sunrise from Douglas down to Kiefer. And including a meeting they set up at Cap to Cap that drew in over a dozen Congress members from Northern California. Unfortunately, even with all that firepower, it still took 2 traffic fatalities to get the Corps to let us widen Sunrise to what it is now. So if you all travel south on Sunrise Boulevard, almost at any time of day, there is a line between Kiefer and the Jackson Highway waiting at the stoplight because of its current importance. And both the county and Rancho Cordova have projects that are going in on both sides of Sunrise. This is not like originally where we really were only building on the east side of Sunrise. This time we will have homes, businesses, shopping, schools on both sides of Sunrise. And when we look to the future, I mean, it just gets worse. So if, like I said, this is not growth inducing because number one, the growth is already there. A lot of this is already either constructed or it's approved. And so we strongly urge you're putting the Sunrise Boulevard back into option one. In terms of the Rancho Cordova Parkway, going back to the late 1990s and early 2000s before we were incorporated, as Sacramento County was approving those projects, which are now, it's basically the Anatolias, Sunridge, all that area. All of our home builders, everybody who built out there was required to contribute to a fund that would ultimately build what was called the Sunrise Reliever when it was first conceived. And the point is, we currently have over 100,000 trips per day going through the Sunrise and Folsom Boulevard intersection, just the intersection, not even trying to get on the freeway, but just going through the intersection. It is important when you consider the number of houses that we have out there now, and when you consider the businesses, the business community that is located along Sunrise, if those people can't get get onto Sunrise or get onto the freeway or go north on the river or whatever to serve their clients, then they either need to move to someplace else that doesn't exist or they go out of business. Yesterday at sitting at Carl's Jr. at Sunrise and White Rock, I watched two very large semis full of crushed vehicles make a conscious decision to turn left onto White Rock to go use the Zinfandel interchange, as opposed to going across that just on up to Highway 50 so that they could go wherever it was they wanted to go. We're all dealing with traffic problems, especially for those of us who have warehouse projects in the vicinity, and the complaints from our residents, the complaints from the local businesses about whether or not they can use business roads, and that Sunrise Reliever is really the only way to do that. We've been through a lawsuit about it. And as I said, they are collecting money. It was a part of the EIR. It was a part of the MMRP. This reliever is a mitigation measure in all of the projects that have been adopted east of Sunrise.
Thank you. No board comments, just general, I mean, maybe since we're not picking, but I know I have a few comments too, but general sentiment about, you know, the importance of meeting the greenhouse gas target. I mean, I think that's an important thing for us to discuss. Is that a priority for this committee and this board?
Yeah, I have a question. So on roadway incapacity, and the further something is away from, the really urban areas, it contributes more greenhouse gas emissions because of more vehicle miles traveled?
It could, yeah.
Or
It's very
it's my
context
working
sensitive
theory,
depending
okay.
on the land use that surrounds it and the uses that the roadway network and roadway segment in this case would serve.
So I'm gonna just pick something that I've been playing around with here. So SR 267 in Tahoe, pretty far away. It's gonna generate vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. Is that a logical working assumption?
I think there's several SR 267 projects. Which one are you referring to?
Doesn't matter. I mean, I could pick.
I know there's a
I
bus
could
only
pick,
lane.
Woody's here,
project
so I'm
and-
not picking
Yeah.
a Camino project, okay? But what I'm saying is the further you get away from where I'm getting head shaking. I'm wondering where we could make some greenhouse gas emission savings. And so my premise is the further you're away, there's potentially more vehicle miles traveled that contribute to that. And I'm happy
I
to.
wouldn't say further away from the urban core. I'd say but it is this transportation land use interaction that's happening more at sort of this, a sort of a local level and a sub-regional level. Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, your statement is true. Generally, the further you are away, the further you're gonna have to drive. For some of the more rural roadways, they don't carry a lot of volume. So yeah, there's more VMT on that roadway, but our target is a per capita target. And so if it's, a bunch of people driving 50 miles instead of 20 miles, but we're talking 100 people instead of 10,000 people, it's going to vary tremendously based on context and who's using the road, what's around it. Generally, you're totally right though, and that's where we paired the land uses with the transportation. So if there's a road way out in the middle of nowhere with a proposed big expansion to it, and we don't see a lot of volume, you see that as marked as out of option one. If there's a lot of housing or job development around that, or we see volumes increasing on the roadway, then we added it. And that's where option one and option two start to differ, is option two is a little bit more permissive on bringing in capacity than option one.
So, Mr. Chair, could I speak to the?
Can I
I'm
ask,
sorry,
can I,
go
thank
ahead.
you, but
Go
can I
ahead.
ask a question? So just to boil it down, I like things simple, although I actually do really want to luncheon just to discuss that model because it sounds fascinating. What happens if we miss the mark on greenhouse gas? Like, can we just keep it simple? Like, maybe not me. Really, really simple.
We would need to do an alternative planning strategy, an APS, and the region would lose SB1 funding essentially. So since 2018, we've.
Oh,
had
okay,
$500
so we
million
lose
in that.
SB1 funding.
Yeah.
All right, super simple. What happens if we lose SB1 funding? Do any of the projects happen then? So even if we lose the money,
You don't lose
projects can still
access
happen.
to federal grants, but you lose access to state grants. We actually had a very good table that we could certainly research forward from the spring when the land use was being, probably February and March, right? Because this was a big question. Well, so what, right? So
Yeah,
what?
I'm just,
So we can show you that. We probably, I think, secured in this region, I think it's roughly 750 million or $1 billion in SB1 funds in the last 5 years. It's not nothing is the point, right?
okay.
And I think what's important, again, this is the board's decision, right? You will decide.
Well, I
this in
mean, I appreciate
December.
that, but I do want to make an informed decision, like if
Sure.
I'm putting on the table losing $1
And
billion.
I think what we want to try to be mindful of, what's interesting in many of these projects, what they are dependent, not all, right? Because the local measures are important, but they're dependent on state and federal grants, right? And SB1 grants. So we wouldn't want to cut ourselves off, that we wouldn't want to work on trying to get a few transportation projects in right now, at the risk of actually cutting a lot more off in the next cycle in 26. So that's a little bit of the trade-off. And as you hear in the next item, we are going to try to figure out if we can make that a little bit easier from a state policy perspective in the next couple of years. But this is what we have right now in terms of the framework.
When and I think we all have projects, I think, that we want in this list. I think every jurisdiction has projects they want in this list that maybe weren't there. I mean, I know I can just speak for my jurisdiction that there's definitely projects that we advocated really hard for to be in this list. They weren't there yet. They didn't make it. But I will say, staff worked extremely diligently with the jurisdiction to help talk about how we can move those projects forward, even if they're not in this list, and ultimately how we can still get them built. And that's huge, right? Because that's the ultimate goal. I mean, in my mind, the goal isn't whether or not it's in the list or out of the list. The goal is, how do we get the project done? And so having a path forward to be able to get those things done, I think is huge. And I just want to say thank you to staff for that. I know, the efforts that you've put in and explained, hey, it's not the end of the world if project X is not in here. Here's some other things we can do to continue to move that effort forward. And one thing you kind of mentioned earlier, and I know we went through this with the land use scenarios as well. I certainly felt like at the beginning of that, gosh, if my land, the land use projects in my jurisdiction that are important and we think are going to happen are not in here, it's like, that means that's not happening for 25 years. And that's not at all, right? I mean, we revisit this plan every 4 years. We talked about earlier, the MTIP gets updated, I think, every 2 years. And if things change substantially and a project gets put in the MTIP, then the blueprint gets amended, I believe, right, to include that project. And so kind of to the point of what's the risk and the reward, right? I worry if we put everything in there that we want, but we fail to meet our target, there's a lot of risk in that.
That's what it sounds like.
If we look at, hey, what are alternatives to keep these projects moving forward, even if they aren't able to be on the list, we can still be successful. And maybe in 2 years, they're in the list.
Well, I mean, I
Right.
think that's part of being on a regional board, right? Knowing that we are not only concerned about, it's this balance where we're not only concerned about our personal projects, but also how the region is successful and making sure that we don't lose out for the entire region. And so just to make sure, just for clarity, you said it's not between option one, it's not between option two. If you're also just wanting to get our feedback of how close should you be trying to get to the greenhouse gas, or just remind me of the ask?
Or just the policy priority, is that the
I mean, for
priority
me, I don't
of
want to
this,
lose $1 billion.
this committee?
Like, it just, just to boil it down.
And should we continue refining the transportation list to ensure that when we bring it in November, we have a feasible, strategy to hit that greenhouse gas target paired with the transportation project?
This is a real question.
For me, that's the only valid answer. I mean,
Yeah.
but I, and I know you have been, but I would encourage you to continue to do with other jurisdictions what I know you've done with ours and work through those specifics and figure out the how, right? The how to move those projects forward, even if they aren't able, for whatever reason, to be in the list today. And if they are able to be in the list, then great, right? How can we get them in there without risking the greenhouse gas target? I mean, I think we all want as many projects as possible in there from all of our jurisdictions and our neighboring jurisdictions, but at the same time, not risking funding.
So, Mr. Chair, just to the second question, they've asked which reduction measures. And I would like to encourage them to think of something besides the reduced transit fares. And I say that only because I know how little regional transit pays for buses and light rail through the fare box recovery. And there is a program for almost anybody in Sacramento County to be able to ride the bus for free. All of our students, we partner with Los Rios for the kids who go to Los Rios. Seniors are discounted. Anybody who can't pay for the bus doesn't have to pay for the bus. And unfortunately, while regional transit has a very intensive bus network for the city of Sacramento, Rancho Cordova and North Natomas are, you could call them a transit desert, because we have almost nothing. And I'm sure James knows this, but but RT's dial-a-ride service is going to have to go away simply because the money's run out. So that eliminates transit, not increasing transit.
Are we okay now? Okay. I mean, I think that's some really good feedback, and I don't know if that item can be a little more broad. I mean, I think as an approach, increasing transit ridership, which is the point of that, I think is really the ultimate goal. And that probably has different individual strategies within it. And in certain jurisdictions that might be a piece of it, is decreasing the fares. But In others, it could be increasing the frequency or increasing the service area, right? I mean, I think all of those things together. And so if possible, if it works, maybe making that more broad as opposed to that narrow.
Yeah, that's great feedback. We'll look into that.
Any other feedback? Hopefully, we can wrap up the feedback. I know we've got a few public comments and we still have one more item and to try to be done by noon. So everything's good. Okay, we will move on to public comment. Does staff have the feedback that they were hoping for?
Yeah. I
Okay,
think we do.
perfect. So we're gonna move on to public comment for this item.
Chair Bradford, did
Yes.
you want to keep public comment at 3 minutes or what?
You know, let's bump it down to 2.
2 minutes, okay.
Yeah. So I do apologize for that, but we need to try to wrap up by noon and we have one more item. So we're gonna start off with Mr. Allison.
Dan Allison, representing Transit, Sacramento Transit Advocates and Riders. I would first like to say that board members get unlimited time to talk and the public gets only 2 minutes. That doesn't seem appropriate, but it is what it is today. First, I'd like to talk about congestion relief, which is everywhere in this proposal. We don't need to relieve congestion. Congestion is either a sign of vibrant economic activity or a misdesigned transportation system. We don't solve it by expanding. I would like there to be an option 0, which is no new lane miles. We don't need more capacity. We need to use our capacity in a better way. So, on to transit. All of the GHG reduction things in attachment B seem good. Some of them great, some of them good. Nothing that STAR would object to. From the 2022 or 2020 things that might be carried over, tolling is moving forward, but only on new projects. We believe that all HOV lanes should be converted to toll lanes. And all it takes is installation of the same equipment that goes into tolling lanes. It doesn't require anything else. It should happen quickly. We support the
30
addition
seconds.
of money for low-income fares. We've been asking SAC-RT for that for years, but they can't do it unless they receive additional funding to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we are going to move on to Mr. Adams.
Chair Bradford, members of the board, my name is Anthony Adams, Director of Planning for Sacramento Regional Transit. As the major transit provider of the Capital Region and the most progressive state in the nation, SAC-RT implores the members of the TCC to be bold and think big when addressing our future mobility needs. If you look around the nation, the most successful cities in the nation are focusing on expansion of light rail and bus rapid transit because highways can only be expanded so much. I'll give you a few examples. Denver, which I know a few people from Sacramento went recently, and I heard really good things about it. In Denver, they've opened up 3 new light rail lines since 2013 and are planning on a 65% growth in transit ridership by 2050. In Atlanta, they're planning on 14 new miles of BRT and 20 new miles of light rail by 2040. Well, okay, we're in California. So let's see how other California people are doing it. And I appreciate the question previously. How are other MPOs addressing these goals of GHG and VMT? Let's look at our rural neighbor to the south, San Joaquin Cog. They have $12.6 billion in revenues. Over 4.7 are being dedicated to rail and transit. That's 35%. So even our rural neighbor to the south, they're expanding ACE, they're expanding Valley Rail. They see the need to expand transit. In Monterey and Salinas, 1/4 of all their investments are going towards transit. I know something was asked recently. What about roadway expansion versus transit expansion? Let's look at the SF Bay Area. How are they doing it? For every $1 that's going into roadway expansion, $10 is going into transit expansion, not just maintenance, transit expansion. So here at SACOG,
30
Blueprint
seconds.
2050, there is, for every $1 that's being spent on transit expansion, $3.5 in roadway expansion is being suggested. So completely flipping this on its head. So to me, it would seem apparent why the Blueprint 2050 proposal is having problems meeting the adopted climate targets. It's because our priorities are in the wrong place if we're looking to move in the right direction. So we're going to ask the members to invest in a strategy that really is in line with your own adopted climate goals, your own VMT goals, and is more in line with other NPOs and their investments in transit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Okay, next up is Mr. Boozy.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. Kevin Busey, I'm the Executive Director of Sacramento Transportation Authority. And I want to provide a little feedback on the option 1, option 2 discussion. I think as staff has proposed or as recommended, you're going to want to identify a plan that meets that 19% reduction target. Option 1 is the one that gets you the closest, but I have some pain with option 1. Option 1 doesn't include some active projects, 3 in particular. One is the US 50 Rancho Cordova Parkway. Another one is Sunrise Boulevard from Kiefer Boulevard to State Route 16, which were discussed earlier. And the other one is in Galt, the Walnut Avenue Highway 99 interchange. So those 3 projects are active projects. The total spent on those projects to date is about $27.1 million. So it just seems odd that you would remove projects that are actively being worked on, have spent a significant amount of local funding on. I think 2 of those 3 projects are in the actual MTIP. So that is concerning. I don't like that. And I understand needing to meet the GHG emissions. So those are obviously priority projects if the agencies have invested that much money into those projects. So if there were other projects that could come off the list and still meet your GHG goals, maybe that discussion needs to happen so we can still meet that option, something along those option 1 goals. And then the second real big issue I have is just alignment between local agencies and the regional plan. And so STA runs a sales tax measure. We want to ensure that what we put forward as far as sales
30
tax
seconds.
funding is in alignment with what SACOG has. And so by removing very high profile projects, high priority projects, it makes it difficult for us to develop a expenditure plan that aligns with SACOG plans, because we want to be partners with SACOG. We want to move their plan forward. A lot of what we have in our current measure and in future measures, funds a lot of these programs that are mentioned here, including we're looking at trying to figure out a way to fund Green Means Go. So we would like to be a partner if possible, but it makes it a lot easier if priority projects are included. Thank you for my time.
Thank you, Mr. Busey. Next up, Mr. Stricker.
Good morning, Chair and board members. I'm Albert Stricker. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Rancho Cordova. And Councilmember Budge said it perfectly, but I'll add a few operational details to the topic of Sunrise Boulevard and also Rancho Cordova Parkway interchange. Sunrise Boulevard in its current condition is in a very dilapidated condition. It is subject to significant flooding both in that stretch from Kiefer down to Jackson and specifically at the intersection with Jackson and Kiefer. And so this creates a disconnect between the communities of Elk Grove, County of Sacramento, Rancho Cordova, and Citrus Heights, and our design addresses that. With regard to the Rancho Cordova Parkway interchange, this proposed interchange that's about midway between Sunrise and Hazel on Freeway 50, this connects to housing developments that are underway right now, including low-income housing and other important amenities. These projects, the city has invested over $25 million into both of these projects, and we expect within the next 12 months, they'll both be in a condition of being shovel ready and in a place where we'll be actively pursuing grants. And so having these projects in the blueprint significantly opens up the opportunities we have to pursue grant funding for both of these projects. Completion of these projects is an important component, not only to Rancho Cordova, but in the entire region in economic development, in safety, in the resiliency of our transportation network, specifically emergency access. And so I would appreciate your consideration, including them in the proposed blueprint that goes to the board for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up, I'm having trouble reading the last name, but Jennifer.
Apologies, Chair. Jennifer Donlin Wyatt, City of Sacramento Transportation Planning Manager. Chair and directors, thank you for having me. I'm here today to thank staff for all the work that they've done. We have a lot of projects that we have proposed in the blueprint, and the iteration back and forth with SACOG staff has been incredibly helpful and fruitful. We don't have every project that we like on the list that's in option one, nor in option two, but we look forward to continuing those conversations with SACOG staff. These projects meet a number of the city goals, which I think align with our regional goals, which is not only climate, but it's also equity and it's mobility. And it also really aligns with the city's goals around economic development and housing. We're incorporating and doing a lot of growth and infill within the city of Sacramento, and these projects will really help us move forward. So again, we just really want to thank staff and show our support for them and look forward to those continued conversations on a couple of projects we'd like to see. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, that's it for public comment, I believe.
Yes, we did have one written comment, and that was a letter from Sacramento County that was distributed to you, is at your seats and is available online.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So next we will move on to our last item of the day, and we have about 10 minutes to get through this one. So Clint, it's Sustainable Community Strategy Adoption Schedule and related state policy issues.
So this was kind of discussed extensively at the SPP retreat back in August at the Policy Innovation Committee and then July 4th. So thank you. So AB 350, which gave us a 2-year extension to work on the 2025 blueprint, that law will sunset. So our next plan is currently due in 2027. So the choice in front of the board was, do we pursue additional legislation to move that sunsetting date back to 2029? That would require us going to get some legislation next year. Do we leave 2027 as the next date and not go back and see, look for an extension? We had 3 options that we brought to you. One of those was leave 2027 alone. And then in the meantime, we do a light update for 2027. We would likely end up with an APS that doesn't hit the greenhouse gas target. But in the meantime, we would work with state partners to see if we could address those SB1 eligibility issues. The second option was to go ahead, go back, push that deadline out to 2029. We don't know exactly what the concessions we might need to make to get that extension. We had some in the original AB 350 that we made, but that was option 2, to go back and work on legislation to extend. Option 3, which was ultimately dismissed by the board, is just not feasible, was to both move the date to 2029 and try to move the RENA cycle as well. That option we've taken off the table. At the board discussion, most of the energy revolved around option 1. That is the recommendation that's going to the Policy and Innovation Committee on Monday. But we wanted to make a stop at all of the committees one more time to make sure we could answer any final questions you have about any of the options, about their merits, the risks, what we're doing to mitigate those. But I can share that, or I can stop right now to jump right into questions and answers.
Questions, comments? I'll just say, I mean, I think the discussion today with item 4 really helped highlight the importance of this decision and both the risk, but hopefully the benefit of option 1. Anyway, that's just my feedback. I think it's important, and I'm glad to see. I know at the Mega Region Working Group, I think there was a letter shared from the other big 4, or the other 3 of the big 4 MPOs of their concerns related to this as well. And so I think, you know, it sounds like we have some great partners if that's how the board chooses to move forward with option 1.
I know we took the wind out of your sails in the previous item, but just want to make sure that, you know, again, I mean, Clint said it and Christina Lockey is here. We run the risk on either play here, and we run the risk by letting the plan go to 2027 that will hit an APS. So that is, as Clint said, the most likely scenario. So we have to go try to change state policy in 25 and 26 so that that doesn't happen, right? So both have risks. We just want you to be aware of that. I thought you had a great discussion at the board meeting in El Dorado County on this, and this is a good chance if you do have any outstanding questions to ask them.
Okay, seeing none, I do not believe we have any public comment on this item. Is that correct, Lynette?
There's no public comment.
Okay, so any other matters? No other matters. Okay. So Anything from staff? Okay, look at that. We managed to
Just that
get,
we're 9 o'clock, 9 a.m., October 17th, for those of you that are used to the 9:30 a.m., 9 a.m. start time with full board meeting on October 17th.
thank you.